Amara Okafor woke up in a hospital bed she didn't recognize, in a city she couldn't name, with a swollen, pregnant belly she had no memory of creating. The last thing she remembered was boarding a plane to Seoul 2 years ago to fight for her dead father's compensation. Now, a kind woman with warm eyes was holding her hand, speaking rapid Korean she somehow couldn't understand anymore, and the ultrasound machine beside her bed showed 3 tiny heartbeats where Amara's memories should have been. "Triplets," the doctor said gently in broken English. "You are having triplets. Do you remember the father?" Amara touched her stomach with trembling hands and felt nothing but terror, because somewhere in the past 2 years, 2 years that had been completely erased from her mind, like someone took a knife to her memories, she'd fallen in love, gotten pregnant, and then something so traumatic had happened that her brain had locked it all away. But here's what Amara didn't know. 300 kilometers away in Seoul, a man named Kang Min-jun stood in an empty mansion staring at the maid's quarters where she used to sleep, having just returned from another failed search, completely unaware that the woman he'd been hunting for was carrying his children and couldn't remember he existed. "Can I ask you a question? Where in the world are you watching from right now? Seriously, drop your country in the comments, because I absolutely love seeing how God brings this community together from every corner of the earth. And before we dive into this emotional hurricane, and trust me, you're going to need tissues, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds, but genuinely helps us keep bringing you these stories every single week. Now let me take you back 5 years and show you exactly how 2 people who loved each other ended up in this nightmare, because I promise you, this story is worth every minute.
K Afro Tales. The weak will become strong one day.
5 years earlier, Amara Okafor wasn't poor. That's the first thing you need to understand. She was the daughter of Emmanuel Okafor, one of Nigeria's most respected structural engineers, a man who'd spent 15 years helping Korean construction companies build half the skyscrapers that now dominated Seoul's glittering skyline. Amara grew up comfortable, educated, fluent in 3 languages, with a degree in international business and a future that looked bright. Then her father died. Heart attack, sudden, devastating. And when Amara and her mother tried to access the pension and compensation her Korean employers owed them, over $200,000 in unpaid bonuses and benefits, they hit a wall of legal technicalities designed specifically to exhaust and defeat them. Korean corporate law was brutal to outsiders, especially to African families with no connections, no local legal team, and no understanding of how to navigate a system built to protect the powerful. So Amara did what her father would have done. She fought. At 24 years old, she took her father's contracts, her mother's prayers, and the last of their savings and flew to Seoul. She'd get what her family was owed, or she'd die trying. That's how seriously she took her father's legacy. 6 months later, Amara was broke, exhausted, and watching her visa expiration date approach like a death sentence. The law firms she could afford were useless. The companies stonewalled her with bureaucracy. Her Korean, despite intensive studying, wasn't strong enough to understand the complex legal documents they kept drowning her in, and her bank account had exactly $300 left. That's when she saw the job posting, Live-in Maid, private residence in Gangnam, one of Seoul's wealthiest neighborhoods. The pay was decent, the room was free, and most importantly, it would let her stay in Korea legally while she kept fighting for her father's money. The posting said the employer valued privacy and discretion. What it didn't say was that the house belonged to Kang Min-jun, one of Seoul's youngest and most dangerous CEOs, a man whose family had built their construction empire through methods that weren't always strictly legal, and whose emotional walls were so high that his own household staff joked he might actually be a robot in an expensive suit. Amara's first day, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Choi, pulled her aside with very specific instructions delivered in rapid Korean. Don't speak to Mr. Kang unless directly addressed. Don't make eye contact. Don't ask personal questions. Keep your head down, do your work, and stay invisible. Most importantly, and Mrs. Choi's face went deadly serious here, never enter the study on the third floor. That room was Mr. Kang's private sanctuary. Disturbing him there meant immediate termination. No exceptions, no second chances. Amara nodded, understanding perfectly. She'd stay invisible. She'd clean and cook and keep her mouth shut. She'd save her money and keep fighting her legal battle and never, ever give this cold CEO any reason to notice she existed. She followed those rules perfectly for exactly 93 days. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was nearly midnight. Amara was finishing her evening duties. The other staff had left hours ago because Min-jun preferred minimal presence in the house after dark when she heard the sound of breaking glass from the third floor. Then another crash. Then something that sounded uncomfortably like a groan of pain. She stood frozen in the hallway, Mrs. Choi's warnings echoing in her head. The third floor was forbidden. Entering the study was grounds for termination. She should go to her room, mind her business, stay invisible. But Emmanuel Okafor had raised his daughter to help people in distress. Consequences be damned. And someone upstairs was clearly in distress. Amara climbed the forbidden stairs and knocked softly on the study door. "Mr. Kang, are you all right?" Silence. Then a rough, slightly slurred voice. "Go away." Amara should have left. Instead, she opened the door and stepped into the room where her entire life would change. Kang Min-jun sat behind his massive mahogany desk, surrounded by broken glass and spilled amber liquid that smelled expensive. His suit jacket was thrown over a chair, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his normally perfect hair disheveled. He looked up at her with eyes that were simultaneously furious at the intrusion and so devastatingly empty that made Amara's chest ache. "I said go away." But there was no real force behind the words, just exhaustion. Amara, instead of running, carefully crossed the glass-covered floor and began picking up the larger shards. "You'll cut yourself trying to clean this up drunk." "Who asked you to care?" Min-jun's voice was bitter. "Who asked you to come up here and see me like this?" "Nobody," Amara replied, continuing to collect glass pieces. "But my father taught me that powerful men are still just men, and men bleed when they're cut, whether by glass or by whatever's eating you alive up here." Something about her words, or maybe just her complete lack of fear, made Min-jun actually look at her for the first time since she'd started working in his house. Really look at her. "Your father sounds wise." "He was." Amara's voice softened. "He died 8 months ago. That's why I'm in Korea, fighting to get what his employers owe my family. And working as a maid in the meantime," Min-jun said, connecting the dots. "That's either very practical or very desperate." "Both," Amara admitted honestly. She finished collecting the visible glass and stood, meeting his gaze directly, despite every warning she'd been given. "Can I ask what you're drinking away up here, or is that above my pay grade?" Min-jun laughed. It was a rusty, unused sound, like machinery that hadn't run in years. "Today is the 5th anniversary of the day I should have died." And then, maybe because he was drunk, or maybe because Amara's lack of judgment felt like oxygen after years of suffocation, Min-jun told her something he'd never told anyone outside his immediate family. 5 years ago, he'd been ambushed by rivals who'd decided that killing the Kang heir was easier than competing with him fairly. 3 of his bodyguards died protecting him. Min-jun survived physically, but something fundamental broke inside him that night. For 5 years since the attack, he'd been emotionally and physically numb. Doctors said it was dissociative disorder, a psychological response to trauma. His body had healed, but his mind had built walls so thick that he couldn't feel anything anymore. Not joy, not desire, not even basic human warmth. "So you see," Min-jun finished, words slurring slightly, "I'm not the powerful man everyone thinks I am. I'm just an empty shell going through motions, running a company because it's expected, but I don't feel any of it. Haven't felt anything real in 5 years." Amara sat down in the chair across from his desk, all protocol forgotten. "That sounds unbearably lonely." "Lonely implies I can still feel loneliness. I can't feel that anymore either." They talked until 4 in the morning about loss, about guilt over deaths that weren't your fault but felt like they were, about the crushing weight of family expectations, about living lives that looked perfect from outside but felt hollow within. Min-yun told her things he'd never admitted aloud, about waking up wishing he'd died instead of his men, about going through the motions of business deals while feeling nothing, about wondering if he'd ever feel human again. Amara shared her fears about failing her family, about being alone in a foreign country, fighting a battle she was losing, about wondering if her father would be disappointed in where she'd ended up. When Amara finally stood to leave as dawn colored the sky outside, Min-yun's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you for not treating me like I'm fragile, for not looking at me with pity." "Pity is for people who've given up," Amara said simply. "You're still fighting. Even if you can't feel it, you're still here. That counts for something." After that night, everything changed. Min-yun started finding reasons to be home when Amara was marking. Casual hallway conversations turned into long discussions over late-night tea that Min-yun started requesting specifically from her. He began asking her opinion on things that had nothing to do with housekeeping, business strategies, family dynamics, decisions about his life. And slowly, so slowly that neither of them noticed it happening at first, the walls Min-yun had spent 5 years building around his emotions began developing cracks. 4 months into their unusual friendship, Min-yun's mother came for dinner. Chairman Kang Se-yun was everything her son wasn't: warm in public, ruthless in private, and absolutely fixated on her son's future. She'd built the Kang construction empire alongside her late husband through a combination of brilliant strategy, calculated risks, and an iron will that had crushed every obstacle in their path. She'd also spent the past 5 years carefully arranging Min-yun's life, including his engagement to the daughter of another powerful family, a merger disguised as marriage, all very civilized, all very profitable.
Amara served dinner silently that evening, keeping her eyes down and her presence minimal, exactly as she'd been trained. But So-yeon noticed everything. As Amara cleared plates, she heard the chairman speaking to her son in rapid Korean, clearly assuming the African maid wouldn't understand. "Your household staff have changed," So-yeon observed, her tone casual but her eyes calculating. "That girl, is she the reason you've been avoiding the engagement dinners I arrange?" Min-jun's response was careful, also in Korean. "Mother, Amara is staff, nothing more." But So-yeon's eyes, when they tracked Amara leaving the room, were cold with recognition. She'd seen something Min-jun hadn't admitted even to himself. And in So-yeon's world, anything that threatened her carefully constructed plans needed to be eliminated swiftly and completely. That night, after his mother left, Min-jun found Amara on the back terrace staring at Seoul's glittering skyline. "You understood everything my mother said, didn't you?" "My Korean is better than people assume," Amara admitted. "I find it useful letting people think I don't understand them. You learn a lot that way." "Smart." Min-jun stood beside her, maintaining careful distance. "I'm sorry she spoke about you like that." "I've heard worse," Amara said honestly. Then, after a pause where she considered staying silent and decided against it, "But your mother is right to worry." "About what?" Amara turned to face him, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "About the fact that we've both been pretending this is just friendship when we both know it stopped being just friendship weeks ago." The confession hung between them like a lit fuse. Min-jun's carefully maintained control visibly cracked. "Amara, you don't understand. I can't. Even if I wanted to, I haven't been able to feel anything physical since the attack. The doctor said it's psychological. My body shut down after the trauma. I can't." "Stop," Amara interrupted gently. "I'm not asking you for anything you can't give. I'm just being honest about what I feel. You make me feel less alone in this foreign country. You see me as more than a maid or a problem to solve. That's enough." But it wasn't enough, not for either of them. The tension that had been building for months exploded 3 weeks later when Min-jun received news that the men who'd ordered his attack 5 years ago had been released from prison on technicalities. The rage and fear that crashed through his carefully maintained walls was the first real emotion he'd felt in years, and it was overwhelming enough to break him. Amara found him in his study, not drunk this time, but shaking with an emotion so raw and powerful it looked like physical pain. "They're free," he told her, voice hollow. "The men who killed my bodyguards, who tried to kill me, they're walking free and I can't do anything about it legally." Amara didn't waste time with platitudes. She just crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. And Min-jun, who hadn't let anyone touch him with genuine affection in 5 years, finally broke. He pulled her tighter, buried his face in her shoulder, and for the first time since the ambush, allowed himself to feel everything he'd been holding back. The kiss, when it happened, was inevitable, started gentle, almost tentative, but deepened quickly into something desperate and necessary. They stumbled from his study to his bedroom, shedding clothes and years of self-protection with equal urgency. And there, Min-jun discovered something miraculous. With Amara in his arms, whispering his name like a prayer, his body remembered how to feel. The desire, the connection, the overwhelming rightness of it crashed through every psychological barrier his trauma had built. They made love like people starving who'd finally found sustenance. Slow and intense, desperate and tender, filled with words whispered in Korean and Igbo and English, and the universal language of two broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms.
Afterward, lying tangled in sheets as dawn approached again, Min-jun traced patterns on Amara's bare shoulder and said something he hadn't said to anyone in years. "I feel you. I feel this. I didn't think I'd ever feel anything real again, but I feel everything with you." Amara kissed him softly, her heart so full it ached. "Then feel this too. I love you. I don't know exactly when it happened, but I love you, Min-jun." "I love you too," he replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being that had suddenly, impossibly, come alive again. Pause right here, because I need to know something. Are you emotionally invested in this yet? Because if your heart is already in this story, God bless you for riding this journey with us. Show some love by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications, because what happens next is going to absolutely wreck you, and you don't want to miss part 2. Now let me tell you why that perfect night became the beginning of Amara's worst nightmare. The morning after should have been beautiful. It should have been the start of something real and lasting. Instead, it became the day everything fell apart, though neither of them knew it yet. Min-jun woke early, his mind already racing with plans. He had an arranged fiancée he needed to formally break off with, a business arrangement his mother had made years ago that he'd been too numb to care about fighting. Now he had a reason to fight. Now he had Amara. He left her sleeping peacefully in his bed and went to make calls, to start the complicated process of disentangling himself from his mother's plans and building a future where he and Amara could be together openly. He was so focused on fixing things that he didn't notice how long he'd been gone, didn't think about how it might look to Amara, waking alone in his bed to the sound of him conducting cold business in the next room, didn't realize that his absence was speaking louder than his intentions. Amara woke to empty sheets and the distant sound of Min-jun's voice from his office, professional and detached, already back to being the CEO. She dressed quietly, her hands shaking with emotion she couldn't quite name. Was it hurt? Embarrassment? Fear that she'd made a terrible mistake? And slipped out of his bedroom before he could see the tears threatening to fall. At work that day, Min-jun was distracted, caught up in legal calls and meetings about breaking his engagement contract. He barely saw Amara, and when he did, he was formal and distant, not because he felt nothing, but because he was in the middle of complex negotiations and couldn't risk his mother finding out what he was planning before everything was in place. But Amara didn't know that. All she saw was the man who'd whispered, "I love you," the night before, now treating her like she was invisible again, like she was just the maid, like their night together meant nothing. 3 weeks passed in a torture of confusion and mixed signals. Minjun avoided her when possible, was politely professional when they had to interact, and gave absolutely no indication that anything had changed between them. He was trying to protect her, trying to keep his mother from discovering their relationship before he'd secured both their futures. But Amara didn't know that. All she felt was herself breaking a little more each day. Then came the nausea, the exhaustion no amount of sleep could fix, the strange sensitivity to smells that made cooking Minjun's breakfast nearly impossible. Amara knew what it meant before she took the test, but seeing those 2 pink lines still made the world tilt sideways. Pregnant. She took 3 more tests, all positive, made an appointment at a private clinic using nearly all her remaining savings because she needed medical confirmation before she could tell Minjun. The doctor's face was kind as she delivered news that made Amara's blood run cold. Congratulations, Miss Okafor. You're approximately 3 weeks pregnant. And based on the ultrasound, I'm seeing 3 distinct heartbeats. You're carrying triplets. Triplets. 3 babies. 3 tiny lives growing inside her, created the night Minjun had finally felt something real again. Amara sat in her car outside the clinic for 2 hours, hands pressed against her still flat stomach, trying to process the impossible. She had to tell him. Despite the confusion and hurt and his sudden distance, she had to tell him he was going to be a father 3 times over. She chose a Tuesday afternoon, rehearsing her words as she walked through the mansion toward his study. The ultrasound pictures were tucked in her pocket, proof of the 3 tiny miracles that would change both their lives forever. She just needed courage to knock on his door and say the words. But fate had other plans. Minjun's study door stood slightly open, and voices drifted out, his and someone else's. Kang Sum-ho, a business rival who'd recently become a reluctant partner after a merger nobody wanted. Amara raised her hand to knock when she heard her name. What about your household staff, the one that has turned into your personal assistant? The walls have ears, you know. Sung-ho's voice was oily, insinuating. That African girl, Amara. I've noticed she seems rather attached to you. Should I be concerned about that affecting our arrangement? Amara? Minjun's voice was dismissive in a way that drove a knife straight through her heart. She's good at her job, but she's just staff. Whatever she might think is developing between us is purely in her imagination. I'm ending that arrangement if you don't trust my commitment. Ending the arrangement. The words echoed in Amara's head as she stood frozen outside his door, one hand clutching the ultrasound pictures of his children, the other pressed against her mouth to keep from making a sound. She didn't wait to hear more, didn't give Minjun a chance to explain that he was talking about a completely different business arrangement with Sung-ho, not about her at all, didn't stop to consider context, or that she might have heard something out of sequence. All she heard was, she's just staff, purely in her imagination, ending the arrangement. With 3 babies growing inside her and her heart shattering into pieces sharp enough to cut, Amara did the only thing that made sense. She ran. She went back to her small room, packed 1 suitcase with shaking hands that kept dropping things, withdrew every won from her bank account, and called her older brother Nonso back in Lagos. I need to come home, she told him, her voice eerily calm despite the screaming inside her head. I need money for a flight. Please don't ask me why. Just help me. Nonso heard something broken in his sister's voice and asked no questions. Within 3 hours, Amara had booked a 1-way ticket to Lagos, written a formal resignation email that said nothing and everything, and walked out of Kong Min-jun's house carrying his children without him having any idea they existed. She didn't leave a forwarding address, didn't explain why she was leaving, didn't tell anyone she was pregnant. By the time Min Jun found her resignation email the next morning, right after he'd finalized breaking his engagement and was about to tell her they could finally be together openly, Amara was 30,000 feet above the Indian Ocean, flying toward home and away from the man she loved who'd made it crystal clear she was nothing to him. But Amara never made it to Lagos, at least not the way she'd planned, because someone had been watching her very carefully, someone who'd heard about the pregnancy from the private clinic doctor she had gone to, someone who viewed Amara as a threat that needed to be eliminated before she could destroy carefully laid plans. Chairman Kong Xian-yun hadn't built an empire by letting problems solve themselves. When her private investigator confirmed that her son's maid was pregnant and fleeing to Nigeria, Xian-yun made a decision. The girl would never reach Lagos, the pregnancy would never be acknowledged, and her son would never know what he'd lost. Amara's flight had a layover in Busan, a port city 3 hours south of Seoul. She had a 6-hour wait before her connecting flight to Lagos. Exhausted, emotional, 3 weeks pregnant with triplets, Amara found a quiet corner of the airport and fell into troubled sleep. She woke to a hand over her mouth and men's voices speaking rapid Korean. Before she could scream, something sharp pricked her arm. The world tilted, blurred, went dark. The last thing she heard was a woman's cold voice. Take her somewhere far from Seoul. Make sure she can't come back. Now, I know what you're thinking. This mother is absolutely evil, right? And you haven't even seen the worst of it yet. If this story is getting to you the way it's getting to me, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what you'd do to Chairman Kong if you could. And make sure you're subscribed because the way this resolves in part 2 is going to blow your mind. Now, let me tell you how Amara survived what should have killed her. Amara woke 3 days later in a hospital bed she didn't recognize, in a city she couldn't name, with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The last thing she clearly remembered was sitting in her university graduation ceremony 2 years ago, her father beaming in the audience, and something about boarding a plane to Seoul 2 years ago to fight for her dead father's compensation. Everything after that, working as a maid, falling in love, getting pregnant, all of it was just gone, erased like someone had taken a cloth to a chalkboard and wiped away entire years of her life. The doctor explained gently in broken English, severe head trauma, brain swelling, retrograde amnesia. Her long-term memories were intact, childhood, her father, university, but everything from the past 2 years was simply gone. The trauma of the drugging combined with hitting her head when they dumped her had caused her brain to lock those memories away, protecting itself from something too painful to process. The baby? Amara asked, her hand going to her stomach in automatic terror. Am I pregnant? The nurse's smile was gentle. Babies, plural. You're carrying 3. They're healthy, but you've been through severe trauma. You need rest. Amara stared at her pregnant belly, visible under the hospital gown, and felt nothing but confused panic. She was pregnant with triplets and had absolutely no memory of the father, of getting pregnant, of the past 2 years of her life at all. The people who saved her were Pastor David Mensah and his wife Grace, leaders of a small Afro-Korean church in Busan. David had found Amara collapsed in an alley behind shipping containers in the port district, unconscious, pregnant, with no identification, and recent injection marks suggesting she'd been drugged. He'd called an ambulance rather than the police because something about the situation screamed danger, and Grace's instincts said this woman needed protection more than she needed official intervention. When Amara woke with no memory, no name initially, and no explanation for how she'd ended up in that alley, David and Grace made a decision. They'd take her in. Their small church served the Afro-Korean community, mixed families, Nigerian students, immigrants who'd fallen through the cracks, and they had resources to help. They found her a small apartment attached to the church. Grace started teaching Amara Korean again, patiently, since the brain damage had affected her language processing. David helped her get temporary documentation using church connections, listing her as a refugee under their sponsorship. Nobody reported her to authorities. Nobody asked questions she couldn't answer. The church community simply wrapped around Amara like a protective shell and helped her survive. The pregnancy was difficult. Carrying triplets strained her recovering body to its limits. There were days Amara couldn't get out of bed, days when the amnesia felt like a blessing, because surely remembering would hurt worse than this emptiness. But Grace was there, and the church women took turns helping, and slowly, painfully, Amara began building a new life from nothing. The triplets were born 6 months later, premature at 34 weeks, but healthy enough to survive. 2 boys and a girl, Kamsi, Oluchi, and Zuri. Amara chose strong Igbo names that connected them to her heritage, to the father she remembered and honored, to a home that had nothing to do with a past she couldn't recall. When they placed 3 tiny babies in her arms, something shifted. Amara fell in love with her children despite having no memory of their conception. She loved them fiercely, protectively, with every fiber of her being. They became her reason for healing, for learning Korean again, for getting work permits and finding jobs and building a life in Busan that had nothing to do with Seoul or whoever their father was. Meanwhile, 300 kilometers away in Seoul, Kang Min-jun was unraveling. Amara's resignation email had arrived without warning the same morning he'd planned to tell her they could finally be together openly. No explanation, no forwarding address, just a formal notice that she was terminating employment immediately. He tried calling, her number was disconnected. He went to her room, already cleared out. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air. For the first month, Min-jun told himself he was angry. She'd abandoned her position without explanation, left him scrambling. But anger faded into confusion, and confusion twisted into something that felt terrifyingly like grief. He found himself looking for her in crowds, listening for her voice, remembering the way she'd looked at him the night they made love like he was worth saving. His business partner and rival, Swang-ho, noticed the change 6 months later. "You're distracted, not that I care though, but this is money," he observed during a meeting. "Where's your focus?" My maid, left," Min-jun replied, the words tasting like ash. "The Nigerian woman, Amara?" Swang-ho's expression was unreadable. "Very competent enough to slowly move from maid to close personal assistant. Have you tried finding her?" The question planted a seed. Min-jun hired private investigators, the best money could buy. They found flight records showing Amara had booked passage to Lagos through Busan 5 years ago, but she'd never boarded the second flight. After that, the trail went completely cold. No immigration records, no financial transactions, no trace. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist somewhere between Seoul and Lagos. Min-jun searched for 5 years, spent millions on investigators, followed every lead that went nowhere. And slowly, the man who'd finally learned to feel again after 5 years of numbness became emotionally dead once more. He went through motions, running his company, attending meetings, making decisions, but feeling nothing. Just like before Amara, except this time the numbness was worse because now he knew what he was missing. He divorced the woman his mother had arranged for him to marry, or rather had the unconsummated marriage annulled, since he'd never been able to go through with it after Amara left. He cut most ties with his mother, suspecting somehow that she'd had something to do with Amara's disappearance, but having no proof. And he lived in his empty mansion like a ghost haunting his own life, waiting for something he couldn't name. 5 years crawled by. In Busan, Amara raised her triplets with help from the church community. She worked as a translator, her fluent Korean, English, and Igbo making her valuable to companies doing business across continents. The money was never quite enough, but Grace helped with childcare, and Pastor David connected her with better-paying jobs, and somehow they survived. The triplets grew into beautiful, chaotic 5-year-olds who filled Amara's small apartment with laughter and questions and love so fierce it sometimes made her chest ache. Kamsi had a serious, strategic mind, always thinking 3 steps ahead, arranging his toys in careful patterns. Ulochi was pure joy, bouncing energy, making everyone around him smile, and Zuri, the youngest by 4 minutes, was quiet and intensely observant, watching everything with eyes that sometimes made Amara's heart skip because they looked like someone she couldn't remember. The children asked about their father sometimes. "Where's our daddy?" Kamsi would ask with his serious little face. "Everybody at school has a daddy." Amara had prepared for this question, rehearsed her answer. "Your daddy lives very far away," she'd say, which was true. "He doesn't know about you," also true. "But Mama loves you enough for 2 parents," which was the truest thing she'd ever said. She never told them she couldn't remember their father, couldn't remember falling in love or getting pregnant, or why she'd ended up drugged and dumped in an alley. Her amnesia was her burden to carry, not theirs. But Amara's body remembered what her mind had locked away. Whenever she saw expensive cars, her heart raced. Business suits triggered anxiety. Wealthy areas of Busan made her palms sweat and her breathing shallow. Her body was screaming warnings about something dangerous, even as her mind supplied no information about what that danger was. And she dreamed. Every night, fragments that made no sense. A man's voice speaking Korean, hands touching her face gently, the taste of tea that was wrong somehow, a cold woman's eyes, pain and terror and desperate pleading, "Please, I'm pregnant." But the dreams never resolved into memory. They were just pieces of a puzzle her brain refused to let her solve. Then came the day everything changed. Zuri woke up with a fever that spiked to dangerous levels and wouldn't break no matter what medication Amara tried. Terrified, she bundled all 3 children into a taxi and rushed to the nearest major hospital. The small clinics in Busan couldn't handle whatever was wrong with her daughter. She needed specialists, equipment, and expertise. She needed Kang Medical Group in the city of Seoul, though she had no idea the name meant anything to her erased past. Despite its far distance, it was simply the best hospital in the region, with specialists in pediatric infectious diseases, and her daughter was burning up in her arms.
The hospital corridor was crowded with worried parents and crying children. Amara held Zuri against her chest, while Kamsi and Aluchi clutched her skirt, frightened by their sister's illness and the chaotic environment. She was searching desperately for the emergency room entrance when her body betrayed her. Her heart started racing for no reason. Her hands began trembling. Her breath caught in her throat like she couldn't get enough air. Every instinct in her body was screaming, "Danger! Run! Get out! Something terrible is here!" But she didn't know what, couldn't see any threat, just felt her body recognizing something her mind couldn't identify. Then she turned a corner and saw him. A man stood 30 feet away, talking to someone at the information desk like he owned the hospital. Korean, her mind supplied automatically. Wealthy, his suit probably cost more than she made in 3 months. Lost, based on his frustrated gestures. And he was turning, scanning the corridor, and his eyes landed on her face, and time stopped. Amara's body reacted like she'd been electrocuted. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her skin flushed hot, then cold. Her knees went weak. She knew this man. She didn't remember him, but her body knew him with a certainty that made her dizzy. The man's face cycled through shock, confusion, and desperate hope. His eyes dropped to the 3 children pressed against her, Zuri burning with fever in her arms, Kamsi and Aluchi clutching her skirt, and his expression transformed into something raw and unguarded and devastating. He took a step toward her, then another. Amara felt paralyzed, caught between an instinct to run and an instinct to move closer, pulled toward this stranger by a force she absolutely did not understand.
Amara, he said, her name like a prayer and a curse combined. He was close now, close enough that she could see his hands shaking, close enough that she caught his scent, coffee and something expensive and achingly familiar. God, you're alive. You're alive. Before Amara could respond, before she could process what was happening, a nurse approached with concern on her face. "Ma'am, your daughter needs immediate attention. Her fever is dangerously high. This way, please." The words broke the spell. Amara pushed past the man, holding Zuri close as she followed the nurse into an examination room, her other children trailing behind. But she could feel his eyes on her back, could sense him standing in that corridor like a statue, and her body was still screaming that she knew him, even as her mind provided absolutely zero information about who he was or why seeing him felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Inside the examination room, Amara tried to focus on Zuri while a doctor examined her, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking, her heart wouldn't stop racing, and through the window she could see him still standing there in the corridor, watching like he was afraid she'd vanish if he looked away. The doctor's voice pulled her back. "Mrs. Okafor, your daughter has a severe viral infection. We need to admit her for IV fluids and monitoring. Can you provide her complete medical history?"
Amara fumbled through her bag for Zuri's health card, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. She's up to date on vaccinations. She's never been seriously ill before. I'm sorry, I don't have all her records with me. I wasn't expecting... "What about the father?" the doctor asked, making notes. "Is he available? We may need family medical history, and if her condition worsens, we might need blood typing for transfusions. Any hereditary conditions we should know about?" "The father isn't..." Amara started to give her standard answer, the one she'd been using for 5 years. "The father isn't in the picture. It's just me." But even as she started to say it, an image flashed through her mind. That man in the corridor, the way his eyes had locked onto her children's faces with desperate recognition. "I don't know," she finished honestly. "I don't remember." The doctor's expression shifted to concern. "You don't remember your daughter's father?" "I have amnesia," Amara explained, the words coming automatically now. "From an accident 5 years ago in Busan. I don't remember the past 7 years of my life. I don't remember getting pregnant or who the father is or..." Her voice cracked. "I don't remember anything." 2 hours later, Zuri was admitted to the children's ward, IV fluids running, fever finally starting to break. The doctors said she'd be fine, just needed rest and medication and monitoring. Kamzi and Oluchi had fallen asleep in chairs beside their sister's bed, exhausted from fear and late-night chaos. Amara stepped into the corridor to call Pastor David to let him know where they were, and found him still there. The man, the stranger who wasn't a stranger, stood by a window staring out at Seoul's nighttime lights. He turned the moment she appeared, and the look on his face made Amara's chest hurt. Hope and devastation mixed together in equal measure. "You don't remember me." He said it as a statement, not a question. Amara's hands clenched at her sides. "Should I?" "I'm Kang Min-jun." He said it like those 3 words should unlock everything. When she just stared blankly, something in his face crumbled. "We met 7 years ago here in Seoul. You worked in my house. His voice broke. "We were together." The words should have meant nothing. They were just words from a stranger. But Amara's body responded, her heart racing, her skin flushing, a sense of rightness and wrongness colliding so hard it made her nauseous. Together? "Those children in there," Min-jun gestured toward the hospital room with a hand that trembled. "Are they mine?" And there it was, the question that connected all the dots Amara didn't know existed. This was him, the Korean man who'd gotten her pregnant 5 years ago, the father her body remembered, even though her mind supplied nothing. "I don't know," Amara said, and it was the truth. "I don't remember you. I don't remember Seoul. I don't remember any of it." Min-jun's face went white. "What do you mean you don't remember?"
So Amara told him about waking up in a Busan hospital 5 years ago with 7 years of her life erased, about the amnesia, about having no memory of being pregnant or who the father was, about the church community that had saved her and helped her rebuild a life from nothing, about raising 3 children alone while trying to fall in love with them when she couldn't even remember conceiving.
As she spoke, Minjun's expression cycled through disbelief, horror, and a grief so profound it looked physical. When she finished, he asked the questions she'd been dreading. Do you know why you left Seoul? Why you were in Busan? Even a tiny detail? I shouldn't be asking this because you literally said you don't remember anything. No, Amara admitted. I just know I woke up there. Someone found me unconscious in an alley. They said there were signs I'd been drugged. That's all I know. Drugged? Minjun's voice went flat and cold. Someone drugged you? Before Amara could respond, the same doctor from earlier approached them. Mrs. Okafor, I need to discuss your daughter's blood work. We found something concerning. Her blood type is AB negative, extremely rare, less than 1% of the population. If her condition worsens and she needs a transfusion, finding a match will be difficult. Do you know if either parent is AB negative? The question was routine, clinical, but Minjun's response was immediate. I'm AB negative. The doctor's face brightened. That's extremely fortunate. Would you be willing to be tested as a potential donor if it becomes necessary? Yes, Minjun said, without hesitation, his eyes locked on Amara. And just like that, with 3 words from a doctor about blood types and genetic markers, everything changed. The nurse took Minjun for blood typing and genetic marker testing. 20 minutes later, she returned with results that made Amara's world tilt sideways. Mr. Kang, you're not just a blood type match. The genetic markers suggest you're very likely the biological father of all 3 children. We'd need full DNA testing for legal confirmation, but based on blood markers alone, the probability is over 99%. The corridor went silent. Minjun sat down hard in a plastic chair, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Amara felt her knees buckle, and she grabbed the wall for support. I missed 5 years, Minjun finally said, his voice hollow. 5 years of their lives, their births, their first words, their first steps. 5 years. None of us knew, Amara heard herself say. I still find this unbelievable. Why? Minjun looked at her with desperate eyes. Why didn't you tell me? Even with no memory, you could have tried to find me. You could have... He stopped, seeming to hear himself. I'm sorry. You have amnesia. You didn't remember I existed. How could you tell me about children when you didn't even know who I was? But I should have known, shouldn't I? If we were together, if I loved you enough to have your children, shouldn't some part of me have remembered? Sometimes trauma locks memories away to protect us, Minjun said quietly. Maybe your brain is protecting you from remembering that. Before Amara could respond, her phone rang. Pastor David, checking on them. As she updated him about Zuri, she watched Minjun through the window, staring at the 3 sleeping children with an expression of such profound longing it made her chest ache. When she hung up, Minjun was still there. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why did you come back to this hospital specifically? Out of all the hospitals in Korea, why Kang Medical? Why Seoul? Amara frowned. It's the best pediatric facility in the region. When Zuring got sick, I researched... Wait, Kang Medical? Is that your... My family owns it. This entire hospital complex and 3 others in Korea. You brought our daughter to my hospital. The coincidence felt too big to be accidental, but Amara had no memory of knowing who owned the hospital. She'd just followed Google results and desperate maternal instinct. I didn't know, she said honestly. I swear, I had no idea this was yours. I believe you. Minjun stood,
visibly pulling himself together. "But I need you to understand something. I've been searching for you for 5 years. I hired investigators, checked every flight record, followed every lead. I thought you were dead. That was easier to accept than thinking you'd left by choice and I couldn't find you. And now you're here, alive, with 3 children I never knew existed, and you don't remember me at all." His voice cracked on the last words. Amara felt something enormous shifting in her chest, some wall trying to crack. "What do you want from me?" "I want to know them," Minjun said simply. "I want to be their father. I want—" He stopped, looking at her with such raw hope it hurt. "I want the chance to prove I'm not whoever your blank memories have made me into. I want to show you that whatever happened 7 years ago, I would never have intentionally hurt you." Before Amara could respond, Kamsi appeared in the hospital room doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mama? Who's that man?" Both adults turned. Minjun knelt down to Kamsi's eye level, his face openly emotional. "Hi, I'm Minjun. Your mom and I are old friends." Kamsi studied him with serious 5-year-old eyes. "Are you our daddy?" The question hung in the air like a bomb. Minjun looked at Amara, clearly asking permission. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. "Yes," Minjun said softly to Kamsi. "I'm your daddy. I didn't know about you before, but I'm here now. If you'll let me, I want to be here for all of you." Kamsi considered this with the gravity of a child who'd asked about daddies many times. "Okay, can you come back tomorrow? I have questions." "I'll come back every day," Minjun promised, tears openly on his face now, "for as long as your mother will let me." He looked at Amara as he said it, the question clear. She should say no, should protect her children from a man she couldn't remember, who might have hurt her badly enough that her brain had locked the memories away. But looking at her son's hopeful face, at Minjun's desperate sincerity, at the evidence that he was their biological father— "You can come back," Amara heard herself say, "but we're taking this slow. You want to know them? Prove it. Show up consistently. Let them learn to trust you. And maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe if you can help me understand what happened 7 years ago, I can decide whether I want to remember." Minjun nodded, visibly fighting for composure. "Thank you. I swear I won't waste this chance. I'll prove to you that I never stopped looking for you, that losing you nearly destroyed me, that whatever happened, it wasn't your fault or mine. Someone did this to us." As the dawn broke over Seoul and Zuri slept peacefully with her father's blood type matching hers perfectly hers, Amara watched Minjun finally leave the hospital. Her body still recognized him in ways her mind couldn't explain. And somewhere in her damaged memory, behind walls of trauma and protective forgetting, lived a story that had shaped 5 years. She didn't know if she wanted those memories back. But looking at her children who now had a father watching them like they were miracles, Amara made a decision. She'd give Minjun his chance. She'd let him prove himself. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Chairman Kang Se-yeon had been alerted the moment Minjun used his credentials at the Seoul hospital, and she knew exactly what his presence in that specific location meant. Her son had found the maid she'd had dumped 5 years ago, found the children she'd thought would never be acknowledged, and Se-yeon, who'd built an empire by eliminating problems before they became catastrophic, was already making calls to people who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. So there you have it. Minjun found Amara and discovered he's a father to 5-year-old triplets he never knew existed. Amara has no memory of loving him or why she ended up drugged and abandoned in Busan. The genetic tests confirm he's their father, but the question remains, what really happened 7 years ago, and who's watching them now, planning to finish what they started? Here's what I need from you. If this video hits 3,000 views, I'll bring you part 2. That's the deal. 3,000 views and you'll get the conclusion to this story. But I need to know, are you invested enough to make that happen? Drop a comment right now telling me, would love eventually win? Would Chairman Kang go to prison for what she's done? Would Amara reject everything, take her children, and walk away abroad to protect them from this family? Or would she accept Min-jun, but secretly take revenge from inside, dismantling the empire that tried to erase her? What ending do you want to see? Hit that like button if you need part 2. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Share this video with someone who loves a good revenge story mixed with second chance romance. And remember, God sometimes allows us to forget the past so we can see clearly who deserves to be in our future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when we hit 3,000 views.
K Afro Tales. The weak will become strong one day.